Welcome to the Microsoft Security Insights Podcast with your hosts, Franklin Grimberg and Edward Walton, where we discuss Microsoft 365 security and Azure security news and products. Recorded February 10th at, what time is it? 18:34.
1534.
No, it's 18:34 my time. No, the right time, right? Not the left time.
Left coast, best coast. What do you want?
Yeah, sure. Thanks to all our listeners and Twitch followers and everything else. This is the Microsoft Security Insight Podcast. We have a special guest on today, but before we get to our guest, let's do a little house cleaning. Franklin, how you doing?
Tired as usual, but great.
Me too, man. I'm dealing with this house. It's almost done. I can get these vendors out of here. I actually had to do real work this week. Burned me out. And stuff. I got my nonprofit shirt on today. I had to do a little bit of the social outreach and stuff like that. But so far, so good. Anything crazy happened this week for you?
It takes us into our first topic. But I have to say that a very exciting week for me because anybody that's looking at our screen, check this out. I finally got the unified portal for Defender. Is that awesome or what?
Well, no small, Ed knows people that knows people, right? So I got you taken care of.
I think everyone has it now.
Oh, is that what happened?
So you took care of everyone.
Well, I took care of myself first. You know what? I got reach. That's what happens, right?
There you go. You complained enough about, hey, stop putting blog posts out there that talks about this new portal, and it's not out yet. So they finally listened to you and said, okay, we'll put it out just so our blog posts make sense now. So
yeah, it makes sense. So we can sort of show people what we're talking about. And mine manifested a couple of weeks ago, sort of. It was the oddest thing though. It wasn't a full manifestation of the complete portal. I had bits and pieces. Now it's complete. So, and this is my personal lab. And so now it's there, and when we do things for it and when I'm tracking, so that's good. So that's a win for you, Frank.
Oh, it's very annoying because I'm happy about this, but I'm very, very annoyed about this because when we get into the new exams that have come out, basically the new exam content, learning content, security stuff just went live, and then 3 days later they come out with this portal. So think about all the exam questions that will have to be rewritten, all the learning content that will have to be updated to refocus you over to this new portal, even though the underlying functionality is still the same, but the navigation's different. But we'll talk about that. Let's introduce our guest, and then we'll get into these new exams.
Okay.
And then we'll ask him about his favorite technology.
All right, I'll introduce him. I have the unfortunate pleasure of knowing this guy, and I know him for almost a year and a half. My only negative thing to say, I wish I had known this guy years earlier. One of the smartest guys you ever want to meet. Really good guy. He fits into the frame that I am, that teaching is learning, right? And he will bend over backwards to show you something. My KQL skills were embarrassing, and I hang on his coattails to be able to get and just learn, right? I've never had a conversation with this person that I had not walked away more enlightened, right? And this is not me bragging for the fact that he's on the show or that he sent me a PayPal or Cash App, right, to say this. A lot of my successes and a lot of things that make me want to work harder is because this guy is super smart. And if you ever get to know him or follow him on something, it's going to be definitely beneficial to you. So I'd like to introduce Matt Egen. Matt Egen, I'll do the intro for him, is a global black belt / principal technical specialist at Microsoft. His duties and responsibilities include all things Sentinel, Microsoft Defender for Endpoint, Microsoft Defender for Servers, Azure Defender for Identity, and if just nobody else is there to do it, Defender for O365 or M365. That is a short list.
For O365.
Yeah, that is a short list of the skills that he had. He's an accomplished code writer, has written applications that have been used in multi-global distribution and logistics and shipping. He's probably wondered by Interpol and a couple other places as being a notorious hacker man, right? And so With that being said, I'd like to introduce our listeners to Mr. Matt Egen from Microsoft of the fame. So, Matt, unless I missed something, go ahead and talk about yourself, sir.
Oh, wow. That was a very nice introduction, by the way. Thank you, Edward. And I definitely value everything, every interaction that we have, I value as well. Although I do feel like you've put this massive burden on me as to like, now I have to actually be good and smart and do things. And I don't know if I can actually do that. I've been with Microsoft now for just a little over 9 years. Actually just had my 9th anniversary last month. What is today? Today's the 10th, so about 30 days ago. Yeah, so my background outside of Microsoft, I actually have gone back and forth between applications development, operations. You kind of get to that point where you flip back and forth, where you write some code, you get the code out into production, everything's good, it's at this nice steady state, and you turn around and you go, wow, I'm going to go find something that's maybe not working so well so I can have some fun with it. You go into operations, get that into a nice steady state, flip back to operation or back to development again. So, and always with a nice undercurrent of security driving the way on all those. So, really happy to talk with everyone today.
Yeah, great. Hey, we really appreciate you coming on. We sort of go unscripted, for guests.
Definitely. I wasn't even expecting us to do the whole podcast today,
Oh, it's
so
fine.
we're 100% unscripted.
Well, we had a guest on last week, maybe week before. We had Mr. Ron Trent from Microsoft, and it was actually the creativity is better for us. We believe when we leave you guys, we don't give you time to prepare, right? Because I believe that when I don't give you time to prepare,
I
you really
didn't even have time to like really prepare my hair even. So
you talk about things that you like, and as such, I think we'll go through the news really quick, and then we're going to jump into any topic you want to talk about. Well, Franklin, go ahead, sir.
Well, I think Matt's a perfect guest for this talk today. Just what we're going to talk about to begin with, which is the fact that Microsoft has now released 4 new certification exams: the SC200, the Microsoft Security Operations Analyst, SC900, which is the Fundamentals Security, Compliance, and Identity, SC300, which is Identity, and SC400, which is Microsoft Information Protection, which is part of compliance. So obviously, exam SC200 is probably more along the lines of what we talk about here, even though we cover all of security, the Microsoft Security Operations Analyst SC200 beta. I don't know, have you taken a look at this, Matt?
I have. I kind of knew it was coming, but wasn't as deep into it, but have started taking a look at it. It looks like actually a really good test, to be honest, a really good certification. I'm going to adjust my monitor here. Another monitor. Now it's over my head. All right, we're going to move it over here. So I'm looking over to the screen just so I can actually see. I'm paying attention to folks. But it's a really good test, and it actually goes quite well into the features of like Sentinel, Microsoft Defender, the 365 stack. So all in all, I definitely give it a thumbs up for covering data. I think it goes well hand in hand with like the AZ500, which was more of the Azure sort of security fundamentals around like networking, key vaults. There's some in there about log analytics, storage, and such, but this is definitely much more security focused. It even takes like the MS500, which was the one for Office 365. This redoes a lot of that security content that personally I found not as in depth as I wanted it to be in the other exams. I think the SC is definitely making up for that at this point.
Have you had a chance to take a look at the Microsoft Learn modules that or learning paths that have come out?
I've taken a look at the first one. I have not gotten very far into it, quite honestly. My schedule has just been an absolute utter mess for the last about a year.
That's a beta question, Matt. He'll tell you why in a minute he's asking that question.
So the Learn modules have 8 learning paths here. You'll notice that the first one, full learning path, is just on Defender for Endpoint. So, which is, compared to MS500, where Defender for Endpoint was just one, paragraph in there. So, isn't that nice to see? If you're a fan of Defender for Endpoint, right?
Oh, most definitely. Been working with the Defender team forever. So back in when it was still called Defender ATP.
Windows Defender ATP.
Indeed. So we even had a cross-platform at all.
Yeah. So out of these products here, Microsoft Defender for Endpoint, Office 365, Cloud App Security, Identity, Azure Defender, or Sentinel, which one is your favorite product?
Wow. That's like asking a parent, which one's your favorite kid? And then you have to kind of look around and go, which kid's not in the room?
It's like old Navy saying 50, 50, 90. 50% yes, 50% no, 90% you will get the wrong answer.
I have to honestly give the sort of parental response of, I love them all equally.
Come on.
No, I really do. I honestly do love them all equally. The capabilities that they all bring to the table, and this is going to sound so schmarmy and salesy, I know, but really the capabilities that they all bring to the table is fascinating. And the fact that they all work together is even more fascinating, because let's think about a threat and how threats evolve, right? Something starts in email, it hits a desktop, immediately it's got an opportunity to go across the entire enterprise. If I know that something has hit in one spot, and I can then share that signal out with the rest of the environment, and I can start blocking things in the edge inside of my email, I can start doing detections and blocks inside of my endpoints, I can start launching automated investigations. It's a beautiful thing. And the fact that all these tools are walking together, dancing together, coordinated with each other, and doing that across the entire enterprise, that's amazing. How could I pick one and say, I love this one more than the other? I can't. And then you bring in, tools like Sentinel, which is starting to bring that same capability outside of just the Microsoft security stack, but now starting to bring that in with integration with things like my Palo Altos. I've got things coming from my Cisco's. That's just beautiful. Being able to bring all of those together and have this waltz, I guess, is the way I'm thinking of it, to be able to do that automation, be able to do that AI, that ML. It's beautiful. So I love them all the same, and you cannot change my mind. So
it was worth a try. All right, so no, so to be honest with you, we're going to have an entire episode on Exam SC 200 coming up. We'll probably have two. One that will focus on the learning content, and the other one that will focus on the exam specific, going over the domains here. Just to let you know that I was involved with. So when Microsoft creates exams, they do, this is nothing NDA, they do a job task analysis session where they go through and they create, they bring in subject matter experts to actually create what you're seeing here of what's being tested. And then it goes out for what's called blueprinting, which the community then can answer survey questions. And then that helps to mold what you end up with here. From there, it then goes out to exam question writers, and then the learning content development, the stuff that you're seeing over here in Learn, is actually sent out to a separate group. So basically, people that write this content actually can't write exam questions. So they're actually done in parallel. So I was involved with a JTA for all four of these exams. And I would say that I was heavily involved with the development of the Learn modules that are here. So you should, Edward, figure that out, because of course there's an entire learning path just for Defender for Endpoint.
Yeah, I know. And so let me give you my perspective. Let me tell you why I like the exams. I'm not going through the learning paths, but I will. I'm going to start, but let me tell you why I like it. No series of knowledge testing is going to be perfect. but it eliminates the ability for you to guess that they have some questions that you're absolutely going to miss, because a lot of them are talking about configurations to connect to AWS, GCP, and other things. You can't fake that.
Mhm.
Either you've done it or you don't know how to do it, right? So I saw some of the testing criteria and the weight of it, configuration and connection to GCP. Well, if you go down here, I think, where is it? Right there. And so connect AWS cloud resources, connect GCP resources, right? If you don't have a AWS or GCP account, which they are free, right? That means you got to go put the effort in to get one of those free AWS's or GCP accounts. The same way Azure would give you an Azure Pass 100 for it, and you need to do that. So I like it from that standpoint. Some of the stuff in the these testing criteria, I don't like that piece, because they're like go up. You just missed something. Right here it says scroll down a little bit more. It says describe alert types for Azure workloads. Come on, alert. It's a serious alert. It's a high alert. It's a medium alert. Right? Those things sort of are just too broad. But something
So
like set up email notifications, that makes sense, because that's part of your IR and or maybe part of your SOAR, and you can hit it from a different standpoint.
Mhm.
And just me,
right.
yeah.
So the thing is that the reason why that's there is that when you take a look at that is so the person taking the test understands what Azure Defender, based upon Azure resource types, what Azure Defender is actually protecting and alerting on, which is a very important. Do you know what? Like I said, I don't know the exam questions. I'm not allowed to write these exam questions because I wrote the learning content, right? So I'm just telling you from the JTA and the thoughts here. Okay, do you know which Azure resources are protected by Azure Defender and what type of alerts or attacks that Azure Defender is looking for? Okay, that's the important point here. What would you expect Azure Defender to do with storage? What would you expect Azure Defender to do with containers? Okay, so as a SOC analyst, it's important for you to understand what sort of attacks that Azure Defender is looking for. Because if you don't understand that, okay, you could actually be replicating effort in Azure Sentinel, which you're already going to be alerted for through Azure Defender, and duplicating your efforts. Okay,
I agree with you.
So normally at this level, okay. So normally if you're doing a fundamentals like SC 900, right, you're going to have a describe, you're going to have an understand. Okay, you're not normally, if you take a look here, most of these are actionable sort of things that you're doing. Okay, there's only describe alerts here. That's because it's more of an you as a SOC analyst, you need to understand what Azure Defender's going after. So that's kind of an exception to the rule, but an understandable exception to the rule for a non-fundamentals course.
And I agree with everything in there. It's just the describe piece seems subjective. Now everything else, configure, actionable task, design, actionable, remediate, actionable, create, actionable, manage, actionable, analyze, actionable, respond. You get my point.
Right. So don't think that described was used lightly in this section.
Okay.
Is what I'm saying.
Well, let's move on to the next one. What's the next topic we got, so we can get to Matt to give us some goodness in our knowledge base, right?
All right. So we're going to do, just to let you know, we're going to do an entire episode on the design of the learning paths here, and why they're important. And so we'll be doing that on a future episode. And then a future episode, we're going to do a more in-depth look at this breakdown. Just realize that this test is different than MS500 and AZ500. This is specific to the SOC analyst dealing with alerts and responding to alerts.
Can I ask a dumb question?
Yeah.
What does SC stand for?
I don't know why they chose SC, but I'd imagine
Security compliance.
yeah,
Security and
compliance
compliance.
and
Okay.
identity.
And I just wanted. Okay.
I mean, they normally call it SCI, but you know, if you take a look at 200's S, 3 is 300's I, and 400's C. I think instead of SCI, they should call it SIC,
Okay.
but that's
Okay.
okay.
All right.
All right,
So what's
so
next?
we will be doing that in the future. And if people have questions now about these exams, I'm actually allowed to talk about this sort of stuff where other exams I can't talk about exam questions because I've been involved with the writing. So that's all I had. Now we can beat up on Matt.
Well, Matt, we didn't have a script. You weren't prepared. You were probably sitting there doing whatever San Franciscans do.
Lamenting
leave
that
it
I
up to
can't
you.
eat indoors.
Yeah, we
The first time I met Matt was actually at RSA, which is in San Francisco, and I have to say it was the best swag that Microsoft gave out at that conference.
Mhm.
I still have it. Unfortunately, my cat uses it, so I'll have to set it up behind me sometime. But it was the Microsoft security blanket. If they ever have that again, you have to get one. It was the best.
I heard that it is a thing of legends. So yeah, I think I wasn't at Microsoft. I didn't get to go to RSA. So the second time you met Matt is I was doing partner training, and we had a question, and I was in Reston. Well, we were in Reston, Virginia, and I said, "Whew," above my head, but I know somebody that knows. And then we got him on the call, and then you guys like, hey, I know you. You're like, hey, I know you. And then I sort of just sat back and played on my Nintendo Switch while you guys talk, right? But Matt, we didn't have a script. So
No
tell us
scripts.
what you got excited. I know what you do day to day. You and I talk all the time, but hey, the floor is yours, sir. Go at it.
What excites Matt in security specifically? I suppose we're talking security. We're not going to talk about the Captain Crunch conspiracy, right?
Correct.
I mean, you know about the Captain Crunch conspiracy.
No, but
He wasn't really a captain. He was more like a petty officer or something, right? A
No,
seaman.
look at his uniform. How many stripes has he got on? He's
3?
wearing the uniform of a commander.
Oh, he's a commander.
But
So he's below a captain.
Yeah, or is it a Commodore? I can't remember which one it was.
so how do we go from the $6 million man Rod to the Captain Crunch conspiracy? I mean, this is
There's a theme.
is this part of the interview at Microsoft? Okay, tell us your thing, right? I mean,
Yeah, it's basically find their weird thing that they're really into. No,
They come from the questions are, why are manholes round?
oh, that's right.
I don't know.
So that they don't fall in. The manhole itself actually can't fall into the hole because if you tip it even on its edge, it can't actually cross the circumference of the hole.
There you go.
So you just throw it in the street and slide it in anyways, but that's okay.
Exactly. That's all you have to do is just take it away, and it doesn't really matter if it doesn't fall in. I mean, it's no longer fulfilling its primary purpose. I figured today, actually, we could talk about something that's actually been kind of interesting to me for a while, and it's what I call the utility/futility of geo IP blocking, and where it's useful, where it's not useful, and why one should be kind of looking at some of the data that comes into it, looking at it a little askance, and why it's not really necessarily all it's cracked up to be, if that sounds interesting at all. I have no idea. I mean, this is literally no script, so I figured we could just chat about that.
Okay, go ahead.
Cool. Well, I mean, so really the concept here is when we think about geo IP blocking, you see it come about in security in a couple of different ways. One, you will see people who will do all blocks on all logins from all foreign nations, irrespective of source. They will say that like no one's authorized to actually access systems if they're outside of the United States, or we don't allow anybody to come into the systems because they're inside of the U.S. There's also other routes where people will say that, hey, I've got some traffic that's going from a cloud service. It's potentially routing through a foreign nation. as a load balancing mitigation, and the customer might say, hey, I received some indicators that, it's going, my data is going through Europe, And the funny thing about it is that both cases are not necessarily accurate in terms of the capabilities that you might be thinking you're doing, like saying, hey, I can't let anybody come in from the outside. Secondly, it may not actually serve a purpose in that, because smart attackers are smart enough to say, hey, even though I'm in my foreign nation right now, I can easily hop onto a VPN and be inside of that country. So it's of little utility is that from a broad sense, meaning that I can't really necessarily say that something coming in from the outside world is bad, nor can I necessarily stop an attacker who wants to come in through a VPN and connect to the environment. And there's a couple of reasons why it's not as valid or as useful as a tool as people would think. And by the way, this would be the interactive part. So if you guys have any questions, definitely ask me about them as I'm kind of going along.
And to compound that, I've seen this in real life. You can compound this by saying that they're not using an atypical ASP with a persistent or high capacity line. What if they're on a carrier-based hotspot? Yeah.
They could bounce all over the place.
Bounce all over the place.
So from a conceptual standpoint, GeoIP blocking is the concept of blocking access to a network based on the geographic location of the network or the network source node as determined by its IP address. And the reason I always talk about the futility of it, beyond just the fact that an attacker can always just hop into the U.S. if they wanted to, or anything like that. People will do it though to I did a survey on Twitter a while back, and some of the things that people came back with was that they had no business in that geography, that there are bad actors in that geography, to reduce the noise and logs. Okay, I get that one. And also for regulatory compliance, maybe from a regulatory compliance standpoint, they can't have anything overseas. The only problem is that when we think about GeoIP based locations, we have to understand where that data came from originally. And that's the one that always sort of fascinated me, because it wasn't until I dug into this that I realized that there were some rather interesting sources of this data. So first, we have to think about where does the data actually come from? Where do the IPs come from inside of the internet at large? At the Uber top level, you have IANA, the Internet Assigned Numbers Authority. IANA then turns around and coordinates, they coordinate the global IP address space. What they then do is they then hand out to regional internet registries, or RIRs. They get assigned IP address blocks from IANA. RIRs, an example of those are Lapnik, RIPE, ARIN here in the United States, APNIC, and then AFRINIC. And they will then, in turn, allocate from the RIRs down to an LIR, which is a local internet registry, or a national internet registry, so a LUR or a NUR. And so the NURs and the lists, the local internet services that are underneath them, will then allocate IP blocks to an internet service provider, and then the ISPs eventually assign them to users, right? So there's all these cascading tiers through which the data is going through to finally get down to that. The funny thing is, all of them have whois data that is published about them, and that whois data sometimes has country data associated with it. And sometimes has, it always has country data associated with it, but sometimes has the locality data associated with it as well. So you might actually be able to see that it has, it belongs to the United States, and maybe there's some data about what state it's in, right? Or maybe there's some data about a, more regional thing, like maybe a city or something like that. Now, because of the country data, we can at least infer that an IP address belongs to a particular region or country. And I'm going to stress that word infer, because there's actually some history and some interesting things behind that. Now, this actually was patented as a thing that somebody could do back in 1999, back in the internet of old. And it was patented by Digital Envoy back in those days. And it's rather smart when you think about it. You already have this WHOIS database. We know that it was assigned to somebody. We can now say, hey, I know that that's coming from that country. The drawback to it, though, is that there may be inaccurate data sources. It's pretty unspecific when you think about it. It is circumventable because as an attacker, I can simply just use a VPN and hop into that country or other countries. And as one person pointed out, or a couple of people pointed out when I queried them on Twitter, it is somewhat discriminatory. I mean, when you think about it, it's like I'm going to say that everybody in that country is bad just because they came from that country. But it's, that's neither here nor there. Now, the reason why it's inaccurate is kind of interesting. IP addresses don't come with geography attached. They really had to be put in as a database of those IP addresses to the location. So while there is a WHOIS record to it, to make it a queryable lookup, I'm either querying WHOIS every single time, or I'm looking into a data source. Because it's a data source that was originally generated by human beings or generated by a service or an algorithm, there's potential issues with that. Now, by and large, it's mostly done through manual means or some data mining. And sometimes it's even done just by guessing based on similar IP address blocks. So when we think about the data sources that are there, some of them have been secondary validation that's gone through with like war driving or from samples of data that's been taken from like different services or hosts or services. There are some stuff that's been going on with augmented data coming in from apps and app usage. So I might have an application that's running on my mobile device and it might say, hey, I'm coming through this particular IP address. Oh, really? What country are you from? And people correlate that sort of data together. Some it's augmented with self-reported. There's actually web services out there that try and crowdsource where this IP data comes from. IP addresses, though, are fungible. They don't necessarily stay in the same place or attached to the same organization, person, etc. So while they'll generally stay in the same country, they can sometimes get moved to different places.
Yeah, and I experienced something like that, and that is assuming that this is a flat communication process. When you start throwing in CDNs like Akamai and its accelerators, I had a troubleshooting nightmare because Akamai is distributed across the globe for the DDoS protection. So that compounds troubleshooting, and hackers, I hate the word, but people that do bad for money, they're buying these services.
Yeah.
Why not sit here and make my ransomware service highly available, right? And cache this type of stuff. So I've seen what you were talking about in real life, where it's, IP address and geolocation is dubious at best.
So in defense of this, I mean, isn't this something good that will just take care of the low-hanging fruit for you and get rid of the stuff, and you realize that, okay, it's a different level person than just somebody that's out there messing around? I mean, is this a bad? I don't see this as a bad thing to do because it does get rid of.
It's not necessarily bad. I wouldn't say that almost any security step that you take is not bad in and of itself. It's the relative value of it overall. As we think about attacks and we think about, well, you said there, it's a different level of attacker who does that. It's not somebody who's just trying something out. It's not just a script kiddie, right? But even script kiddies now have acquired Apex level predator type tools due to disclosures and things like that. With the prevalence of VPNs as well as Tor networks, et cetera, that has started to hide a lot of that data as to where this information is coming from. So what's the value necessarily? If you're spending an inordinate amount of time, or if you're making large decisions, maybe even based on like conditional access, et cetera, I would say don't necessarily use just GeoIP. I would say it is a control. It is definitely of value. I would say it's not the end all be all. And that's, I've seen some folks who've actually felt very confident about their source data. And I mean, let's just talk about like IPv6 for a second. I mean, we are officially out of IPv4 addresses. IPv4 is what, 2 to the 32nd in total number of address spaces. IPv6 is 2 to the 128th in source IP addresses. That's 340 undecillion addresses that are out there, and nobody's got a database on those. And more people, machines, IoT devices, etc., are getting assigned IPv6 addresses than IPv4. So once again, I now have this data set that says, I don't know where they are. You know, they could be anywhere. They could be sitting down the street from me. Because they have an IPv6 address, we don't have hard data on that yet. Now, will we eventually? Maybe. I think that at 340 undecillion addresses, it's going to take a while for us to build out a very solid database on that. And unfortunately, that means that attackers are going to be able to hide behind that utility that is an IPv6 address for a long time to come.
So what do you think about people that you say, okay, inside of M365, they say, here's our New York's office location and the IP address. So now all those people don't have to do MFA or whatever. I mean, you know, those are the things that drive me crazy, where we're assuming based upon the location. It's like, oh no, an attacker will never get to their machine in there. So let's just give them free access because they're at a known good IP address for the New York office. So what's your recommendation on that?
I would say it's a lot like when you think about even the concept and purpose of MFA, right? It's something you know, something you have, something you are. It's a conditional access policy that is based on one condition, just means it's one thing that needs to be circumvented by an attacker.
Or I like to sort of take it and blend it into the old training day with Denzel Washington. It's not what you know, what you can prove. So I like to say is, you know, who you are, what you know, and what you have, right? Who you are, your security context, your login, what you know is your password, and what you have, which is whatever that multi-factor authentication framework is, whether it be a FIDO or a device, right? And then sometimes you're going to go into four-factor, which is what you can prove, which is what we had in the military, which we had a concept, we had a protocol called two-person concept, where someone who had equal level of knowledge and skill than everybody else validated that who you are. And I'm surprised technology hasn't taken off like that, whereas we have PIM, but I'm thinking about I log in, so I have a unique name. The authentication fabric says yes. What I know is my password, right? It still do that, even though passwords people are trying to eliminate. What I can prove or what I have is this thing that says, ooh, do. And then one more that says, someone will cop for me. That when I complete the validation, someone will say, yes, I know that person. And so now you're having a four-factor. So I'm surprised startups haven't come with that. And I know that's onerous and a lot of friction for IT, but for places like, you know, agencies, military, DOD, stuff like that.
Water plants, power, energy, things like that.
Why would you say water plants?
There may be something that might have caught my attention. And I'm just fascinated that, oh my gosh, why would you have that on a system that had the ability to do that? It
should have been air gap. It should have been nothing more that, and stuff that's critical like that, it doesn't need to be cutting edge. It needs to be very basic and it needs to be hard to access. It should be running COBOL. It should just be that, right? But I won't go into that. That's something else. But back to what you were saying, that we're gonna have to maybe go into a little bit more authentication, just outside of conditional access.
Yeah, talking about the conditional access and the location, having it tied only to a location, I think is where we have the problem there. Conditional access policies can be stacked on top of each other. So you could have that if somebody is in the New York office and they're on a machine that is Azure AD joined, there we go. Now it's maybe they breached the network in New York, but they may not have actually breached an endpoint inside of New York.
But does this go by the zero trust principle here?
going with the concept of the machine that is joined and not trusting anything that comes in.
No, just saying on the MFA side that, hey, okay, they're in New York. It's Azure AD joined, so it's okay.
Well, I didn't say that. I said it's in New York, Azure AD joined. You can't have more layers on top of that. There's going to be things where, I mean, and I don't want this to turn into, it's called Microsoft Security Insights, but I mean, let's talk about the other things that are in there. You can have a conditional access policy that ties you in on the device that says you're in New York, that you're in a trusted location. We can then say your device has to be Azure AD joined. It has to be compliant with policy. And policy compliance could include that there be absolutely no security issues being raised by Defender ATP on that endpoint at the same time. That combined then with the data and data restrictions applied by AIP. So in other words, saying that a user who's accessing this data, I'm not going to just give them the data. I'm going to control the data at that point. Maybe if you meet all those requirements, yes, you may actually look at that document and you can open it maybe in Word. On the other hand, it may come back and go, I'm not going to let you do that. You got to go into a browser session. I'm sorry. You're going to have to just have a read-only copy of this because it's sensitive enough based on its data classification. So I think it's a hybrid, really, when we start to think about zero trust and leveraging conditional access on those. I think you do need to take that hybrid approach. I think you do need to layer in not just one single protection layer that can be overcome, but a number of them in line. But keeping in mind that for every control that we put into a place, we're potentially introducing a productivity pothole for our users, and they will find a way around it.
Well, and you're right. End users become some of the smartest people you need when they got to get payroll done, taxes are done. But it should also be that if you pass this rigorous thing, that you have a series or a token life or an authentication or a safe period. If I make you go through 50, 100 steps, then that authentication process should be good for the day, right? And I know that increases a risk factor saying that, Edward, someone could get through, and if they got it, and now you're allowing these guys to have unfettered access for 24 hours, I'll take that risk because I knew that the effort to cross the moat with the fire-breathing alligators, the acid spitting cardinals and the saber-toothed, kittens, you're going to keep people out, right? And so, and include that, it's not just the challenge. It is also making sure that the challenges is being accompanied by the back-end intelligence to watch. It walks like a duck. It swims like a duck. It flies like a duck. It quacks like a duck, but it's not a duck. Why? Because this duck is saying Aflac, and why is this duck going out of his way to prove it's a duck, right? So that's the defense in depth with all the other things that you say. I'm willing to take that risk to say that if I have the defense in depth that's being adequately enforced, that I am cool with making the authentication renewal a longer period of time. Not multi-day like DHCP when you get a lease forever. I'm not a big fan of DHCP addresses being more than a day, but that's a wholly different conversation, right? But authentication is being 24 hours to say that 24 hours from now from this, and think about things like PIM, right? When you need to log in a security context higher than what your normal, login posture is for checking email. It's process. It's not even technology. It's process.
True.
And then if you communicate the process to the power that be, the bean counters, the rainmakers, people that drive the revenue, and you give them an expectation, and then reward, right? Reward individuals in such a manner, man. One of my old VPs used to say compensation drives behavior. So there is no perfect answer. And fear-mongering is not the other. Well, if you get hacked, it's going to do this. I'm not a big fan of fear-mongering. I'm a big fan of
fear-mongering is terrible.
Yeah, if you do this, this is what's going to happen to you. That's it. No fear-mongering.
But at the same time, so I think that acceptable risk is exactly the concept here, right? Is what is acceptable to myself, to my organization, What is acceptable to me based on the sensitivity of the data, even that I'm working with? Going back to what I was saying, if I have a particular document or particular data classification, that may have a higher requirement than this lower one over here, right? So my higher requirement is, this one's really about, our super secret waffle iron that's coming out and that we need to make sure that the, competition doesn't find out about. That may be one that I never allow anybody to review remotely, right? Or I don't allow them to view it and download it. They can only ever see it in a web browser. And even then, I don't let them save it, modify it, etc. Right? It's a melange, to use a very pretentious word, but it's a melange of things where I've got a combination of data classification, data sensitivity, conditional access controls, and other mitigating and compensating controls that are all leading me to what is my acceptable level of risk for a data type, data source, or control. On top of that, I would
And the
say
reason I
that
like this conversation is that we sparingly talked about technologies. We're a Microsoft shop, right? That's what this podcast is about. But there are other vendors and technologies that
of
can
course,
do this. But this is a process. You're going to get, Matt is a huge threat intel, data analytics, threat prevention, and stuff endpoint, right? And then we
look,
have
it's
peers in
COVID.
the,
I can't help that I put on this 15 pounds.
yeah, well, then you got security and compliance, but you're closer to process than we are. But process is the thing. Put it in and enforce the goddamn thing, right?
Yeah.
And say, this is how we're going to do the work. Because if I realize that anything deviates from, you can't trust technology. Technology is only as good as the individuals that created it. But you can trust the process, because the process is saying that if anything looks like this,
I for one welcome our new robot overlords. So I definitely
yeah, for
trust
sure, right?
technology.
You know,
But I think that the problem with process, it's the same as with most anything else in technology. It is beholden to humans and their implementation thereof, right? So I can have the greatest plan in the world, and if my team doesn't implement it, and I don't have controls and I don't have audits around that, it unfortunately isn't going to be much, and it's not going to do much. The
can
the
control
door.
the process. You know why? Because the process can be created in-house as IP.
Yeah.
But I can't control the technology, especially if I got multiple vendors. I'm at I'm at the mercy of what they say is the operational limitations and technology, what the product can do, right? You know, but if the process says this and that, I can see and I can put multi layers of process, and then I can monitor the process. The technology, well, I ask you, for those who are not super ingrained into the technology, if you would ask the average IT person, not even the average IT person, someone that's been in the field for as long as Franklin, myself, and you, how does Windows Update work? From all the way down to here, people are like, well, you sign up for it and downloads update. But how does it really work? What is it doing to your operating system?
Yeah.
Now, Linux people may be more adept in understanding when you do a package upgrade, but for the average Windows person, you ask them the details of, they don't know. They'll just say it updates. But does it modify the kernel? Does it open up the OS, and then it puts in changes and locks it back down? What does it do with all the bits it didn't use? Does it delete them? Nobody knows, right? But with process, I can say blah 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 blah. Well, the process is broken. Why? Because what's the name got fired, so there's a new email that needs to go to.
Yeah.
Oh,
Well, and
okay.
I think that's the thing is process and really the compliance and all those sort of things, auditing, they're almost the lost arts in some ways. If you think about sort of what's the mantra of Silicon Valley, right? Is move fast and break things. I forget who actually said that. But if you are moving fast and you're breaking things, you can't have a whole lot of process in place around that. And I think that unfortunately, a lot of the cybersecurity realm, a lot of the information security realm, let's just call it computer security, has forgotten that process is paramount and process is good. To completely steal a phrase, actually from Gordon Gekko, instead of greed is good, process is good. And if you understand the processes that are in place in your organization, you understand the processes that are in place or should be in place in your environment,
And,
it'll lead you to better results.
and I'll go to a pet peeve. I don't like the CISO role in big corporations.
Okay.
I don't like it
Why
for
not?
two reasons. I don't like it because you infer that the chief information security officer understands other things. And oftentimes the CISO is not at the same level as the CEO, CFO, CTO, and other things.
Mhm.
I believe that you should have, if you're going to have a CISO, he's in charge of the information. He should be equivalent to like a data protection officer. But I also think you need to have a chief security officer.
Mhm.
And the security officer is looking at the technologies that may be away from governance and DLP and all these other things that is a peer. But even if you had to have a CISO and say, now you're splitting hairs, the CISO needs to be in that room. The thing that frustrates me most about that particular role in what you're talking about process is that that person is not at an equal level. It oftentimes reports to the CFO
Mhm.
or reports to the CEO, and they're bean counters. So his judgment is being modified and altered by, can I make budget? He should have his own budget. He should be in
Sure.
an equal thing and say, this is what's going to happen if you do not let me do my job. And I think that you should have a chief information security officer and a chief security officer, and they should be peers. And so the technology vetting is the CSO, and the validation that are you protecting the data that allows us to do the line of business,
Mhm.
right? Why information? Why does information have to be in there? Why is I important? Maybe because hackers are after the data, which is inferred to be information. But a chief security officer, in a perfect world, should be a CISO and a CISO, right? And
Well,
the
I think.
CISO, yeah,
Sorry, go ahead.
CISO should
Go,
have this thing. Well, why are we putting this in? Because I say so, right? But as long as you have a direct
I'm a
line,
CISO because I say so.
I'm a CISO because I say so, right? And these are things that are going to happen, and it's going to happen. Whenever I'm on the blog, I talk about this. Why the CTO role is almost non-existent. Have you guys noticed that now in all these big companies?
I've not noticed it, but
I've noticed that the CTO in some of the larger companies, you don't have a chief technology officer whose job is to stay abreast of the emerging technologies and not let it fall to operations. You need a big thinker,
Mhm.
right? When you got the CIO or the CISO talking about whether we should use containers or not, that's a wrong thing.
I
You need
agree.
a technology officer that says, here are the emerging technologies.
Yeah.
Now, do we marry the technology to the business? And I'll stop right there.
No, and I agree with you. I mean, I think that there's change potentially afoot in the boardroom. I think that the CISO role is definitely evolving. I like the idea of sort of a technical CISO, right? Where you know Jim is in charge of the traditional CISO stuff. He's doing the policies, he's doing those sort of things. And Jane, she's in charge of the technical aspects of it. She's leading the charge on what are the new technologies and what are the potential implications for that. The apex of those, though, where we go into like the sort of standard boardroom thing, this kind of goes back again to that concept of process. This is just the thought that popped in my head. When we think about like data recovery, we think about business continuity, we think about disaster recovery. When we look at those from a, like just across the board, I think that a lot of organizations, again, are kind of forgetting some of the baseline processes that are there, sort of forgetting some of the baseline concepts that are there. If we think about, well, let's think about one of the oldest questions in the book. when was the last time you actually exercised your data recovery plan to get data back from a tape, from a offsite source? How do you know that you actually have this data anymore?
And you compound that with people are getting lazy.
Yeah.
And the answer is, I put it in the cloud.
Well,
So
I don't know. I don't know. Lazy is the right phrase. I would say people are getting busy and they get distracted and they get overly confident in their tools, and they feel that they can cut a couple of corners to try and make more time for themselves. I mean, I just hate to say that they're lazy.
yeah,
I mean, some of them probably are. Some people probably
and
are
you're
lazy.
right. And you're
So
right. I
I'm one of
wasn't
them.
being
I'm
very, I
very
wasn't
lazy.
being very charitable to my peers there in the field, because when I was actually, not that I've really been in the in support role, I've always been either, a professional services consultant or something like that. And lazy wasn't a charitable description of it. I would
Oh,
say distracted. They're
distracted,
distracted.
definitely.
Eh,
I mean, I
You know.
came from, so before I came to Microsoft, I came from operations, and we would have, a plan to exercise something and do something. We would test it out.
Mhm.
You always had the things that you wanted to make sure that you were doing that were working. And this gets back again to that auditing standpoint, right? Of making sure that something works. It's the, what was it one time that we described it with an auditor? It was, say what you do what you say, now prove it, right? So that was the standard audit. It was, here's what we're going to do. We're going to have our data backups. Our data backups occur X, Y, and Z time. We then made sure that we implemented that, and then you have to prove it. And the best way to
Mhm.
prove it was to basically put yourself through the same audit that you did last year, or last period of time, whenever you do your audits, to validate those steps. In between, make sure that you exercise some of those recovery steps, test out systems, test out doing this, that, and the other thing. Well, the problem is that as much as we all want to do that on a day-to-day basis, other things come to light. Case in point, I have had a personal to-do item to call the garbage company and find out where the heck my recycling bin disappeared to a couple of weeks ago. And I kept putting it off and putting it off and putting it off because something came up. Now, that's not on par with like testing your data recovery, but it is an example of how people can get distracted from things.
And so,
By the way, I got my recycling bin back. So,
and that is an opportunity for Microsoft not to fix that. And it's an opportunity for partners and other companies to come in and say, we can do this for you, whether it be an MSP. If you're an MSP for a customer or an MSSP, part of your duties and responsibilities, you should be testing the backups. But I've yet to find very few MSPs that when you look at their dossier of the services provided, that says, we would test your backup and restore processes. Right? They'll say they're doing it for you, but when you go to them and say, okay, it's time for audit, show me how you did it. I came from the partner realm.
Yeah.
80% of them failed. They failed. When the customer finally called them to the carpet and say, stand up me a server, isolate it, and now restore this. And they could not do it because the backup worked. And then they realized, I give you a case in point. I was in the field, I was consulting, I got pulled into a huge opportunity, and the environment went down hard. So the partner, or it might have been a vendor who was managing this, and the backups had been running successfully. So they had decided to virtualize the entire environment, domain controls and all. Screw safe and put a physical domain controller that you can put your hands on. They virtualized them all. And then the sands went down when they did a firmware upgrade, and they asked question, do you want to zero this out to do this? First fail over to node number 2 to be able to do this, zero this one out, and then you will fail the data back over to this one and do this. Nobody read the small print. And they lost all their data, but everybody was like, oh my God, we got our backups. So they first saw it, and people were sweating bullets. Oh my God, backups. Backups had been going on successfully for months. But when they went to the backup, they said that the backup size was 4 megabytes.
Ooh.
So the backup didn't throw an error because it was backing up. They never chose the correct folders.
Ouch. That hurts.
And then they virtualized the
all the
entire
feels on that
Exchange
one.
environment. And that was one of the hardest projects I worked on. I worked on that project for 6. We recovered the environment, and I wrote when I used to be in collaboration, we wrote a huge blog about that. And people were like, how did you pull that off? Luck.
Mm-hmm.
I end up restoring the entire Windows infrastructure from a Mac that had been on the network, and I found a Windows NT BDC. So I'm dating myself back a little bit.
Yeah.
Not too far back now. It's about 10 years ago.
It's scary, isn't it? It's only about 10 years ago.
Yeah, about 10 years ago. They were running Windows NT 2003, a Mac, and a laptop, and I totally restored the Exchange environment.
Wow.
And I tell you, I used to have hair. We just got lucky, right? And so, we dialed tone mailboxes and did all this other stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But the person, I won't even go to the details.
So,
but yeah, go ahead, Frank.
I mean, so I've been involved with prototyping backup environments and testing it. Okay. So that's one of the nice things now about Azure is the fact that I can look at or get the specs of what's going on in the environment, move it into Azure, set up the recovery side, and then go through the entire testing cycle of it just as a prototype, and then say, okay, let's do this now for your backup site. So I think the effort to get up and running with a real backup and recovery plan can be prototyped in Azure pretty quickly now, and then implemented into a real environment. I think that people are missing that opportunity.
Oh, the cloud has evolved so much. It just completely, to talk about that for just a second. So before I came to Microsoft, I worked in industry. And I always laugh. That's why I could say, I can't necessarily call anybody out in the field lazy. I'll say distracted, definitely. I still have a form of PTSD from my BlackBerry going off in the middle of the night, where I had the skill set developed to be able to crack one eye open, read the screen, and go, "That's not that important," and go back to sleep. In the before times, in the long, long ago, there was an opportunity at the company that I was with to move from our on-premises Exchange environment, move it to the cloud, move to BPOS, the original, pre-Office 365 implementation. And at the time, I looked at the cloud, I looked at the costs, and I looked at what's going on. I'm like, no, sorry, it just couldn't do it. Had no reason to move it from any of the traditional metrics. It wasn't going to save me any money. It wasn't necessarily going to save me anything in terms of capabilities, etc. Now, maybe I could push off some of my maintenance hardware, having to have defaults and backups and all that sort of stuff. But the cost value wasn't right. I mean, it was just way too expensive for what I got for value. Fast forward to today, or even to 4 or 5 years ago, and it's a completely different story. It's like, why would I ever want to keep Exchange on premises? Because one, my staff, yes, that is their job, but it's not, there shouldn't necessarily have to be their primary job to handle the care and feeding of an Exchange infrastructure on premises, or really to handle the care and feeding of anything on premises at that point. If I can do it in the cloud and I don't have some sort of a regulatory need or something else that says keep it on-prem, why would I? And if I look at like agile businesses nowadays, they have no reason to keep anything on premises. If you didn't start on premises, there's no reason to stay on premises. If you didn't start on premises, there's very little need to even think about keeping an Active Directory environment on premises. Leverage Azure AD instead. There's a charity that I work with and managing their IT infrastructure. We moved them over to Office 365. I mean, they're a very small group. I mean, they're not big at all. But we moved everything off to Office 365. We'd been running on email that was provided by a third-party service. We were not utilizing SharePoint. We had some older file servers, that maybe had some data on them, if the backups ran and everything like that. And the problem is that they don't have any dedicated IT resources for this at all. Moved everything to Office 365. We now have archives and records of everything that we've done. We've got a SharePoint site where everybody's saving things. Every single endpoint is being backed up into the OneDrive for Business.
Why don't you move them over to the, what is it called, the Windows Small Business Server? What was it called back in the day?
Windows Small Business Server. And it's actually just
SBS.
Windows Server. Yeah, SBS. I did actually consider that about 7 years ago. 6 or 7 years ago, we actually looked, because we have a server room, right? It is better than a glorified closet, but it's still just a single rack full of equipment. And we had an AD environment. We had some email that we're running on premises, et cetera. But at the end of the day, they don't have the resources. Their job is not to do IT work. Everybody who does anything for IT volunteers, like me, and their job is to do volunteers work that actually goes out and helps people to do things like helps feed the homeless and takes care of kids and veterans and things like that.
I was just kidding about the small business server. So
just
trying to do a throwback Wednesday,
Yeah, but no, I mean, for some organizations that actually might have made sense back in the day, but now they don't even have to bother with that, and that's a beautiful thing.
So let me ask you, what are your top 3 things, technologies, Microsoft security technologies that you see customers not implementing that they should be implementing?
Ooh, top 3 that they're not
taking advantage of.
And that they're not taking advantage of.
They might have implemented, but they're not taking advantage of it.
Wow. There's 1 or 2 that I would say at the root that people definitely need to look at is virtualization-based security inside of Windows. I am a very strong proponent and believer in the power of virtualization-based security, even for just things like Credential Guard. If you've not turned on Credential Guard, turn on Credential Guard. It's not that hard, especially in a corporate environment.
Is this in conjunction with something like Windows Virtual Desktop?
I'm sorry?
Is this like part of Windows Virtual Desktop, or you're still talking about?
No. This is just
We're talking
straight
about
up
VBS, straight up hardware-based virtualization based security. So
I'm going to agree. I'm going to agree with Matt with this because it drives me crazy out there. It's like, oh, look, this Windows machine was breached and they were using Microsoft Defender. But I'm like, yeah, they didn't configure anything on that Windows machine, which drives me absolutely nuts in there. So one of the things that you're going to see out here on the learning path for mitigate threats using Microsoft Defender for Endpoint, even though this is Defender for Endpoint, there's actually an entire section here talking about implement Windows 10 security enhancements with Microsoft Defender for Endpoint. Because I just, the attack surface reduction rules, I just don't see organizations taking advantage of it. And that's why this is specifically in here to make sure that the security analyst is working with the endpoint management team to make sure that even if the endpoint management team doesn't understand all of these things, that the security analyst is saying, here's what you need to have activated. So you are absolutely correct.
It's even more than that. There's the security baseline recommendations.
Right.
So even if the team doesn't quite understand what the settings are doing, we have security baselines that you can turn on for all of those.
Which, by the way, I have a lot of complaints about.
Okay.
So
let me get the pad of paper out here and let's start.
He got a lot, man. You need more than pad of paper. You need to get something digital.
So yeah, I mean, if you take a look at let me go to the endpoint manager, device management. I guess this is what they have it now. And my biggest complaint here on more resources is that, hey, let's see if they change this. Defender. Nope, they still put Defender Security Center. They changed the names of this. Azure. I was always annoyed that they actually put Defender for Endpoint last, but it looks like they might have changed that in the list here. But here's the thing about the security baselines out there that I think is... you have the Windows 10 security baseline, you have the Defender for Endpoint baseline, and the Microsoft Edge baseline. The Defender for Endpoint baseline is completely useless. If you really take a look at what they're actually turning on and off for that. You'll see that you're still better off coming in here and working with your Windows baseline, because realistically speaking, this Defender for Endpoint baseline is needs a lot of work to make it what it should be.
You're looking at a couple of different areas, though. I mean, that's the thing, is the Windows 10 security baseline is your configs that are sort of outside of the, it's outside of the EPP EDR stack, okay? The security baseline, on the other hand, of the Defender for Endpoint baseline, is that EPP EDR componentry that's in there.
I think that you have to take a further look at what they're actually configuring in here. A lot of the EDR stuff is already in here. And the configurations are actually minor. But the interesting thing is that the naming of these categories that they have in here are not consistent across the other one. So where you might say, hey, it's not in here. Yeah, it's actually in here. That you're looking for. So I can't remember all of the different names, but here's all the attack surface reduction rules that you would actually be getting over in.
Scroll down a little bit on that one, because there's one in there I really want to point out to folks. That one right there, block execution of potentially obfuscated scripts. Turn that on. Unless you're really running obfuscated scripts in your environment. That's another, well, you said three things, right? So first is CredGuard, second is that particular one. Right. The third thing, what is the third thing that I wanted to talk about?
Let me give you my pain point here.
Sure.
Why do I have to go here to do this? Why can't I do this in Microsoft Defender for the endpoint portal?
Do you want to have this? You want me to have that conversation again as to why I think
you know why you and I talked about this. And
so I mean, I like to hear this. Go ahead.
Well, so I put it this way: why do I have to go here? Why do I have to go there? This is, in my humble opinion, this is a legacy of. Kind of sounds schmarmy again. It's a legacy of success, but there's success from so many different teams that are out there that have done all of these different management and control planes, all these different ways of doing things. And the problem is that we can't unfortunately just rip the Band-Aid off and take away all these existing control points. Considering policy CSP, which is the MDM stack, I've got GPOs, I've got PowerShell, I've got X, Y, and Z. And it's the harmonization of those across the sources that has been sort of the biggest issue in my part. Secondly, when we look at something like Defender ATP, and we look at the controls that we have inside of the tooling, this is, again, that separation of the security team from the operations team.
Right.
Who owns it, right? Should a security analyst or administrator be able to set and dictate corporate policy that's implemented on the endpoints? And I think that that's sort of a legacy thing. It goes back to the old days and the old adages of, well, I can't turn that on because I don't know if it's going to break processes in the environment. And valid opinion. I mean, no offense. And this gets back to what I was saying 22 minutes ago. If you have a security control that you're putting into place, it's always that balance between productivity and security, and who's going to win that one. If I could say from a security standpoint, well, yes, I definitely want to go turn that on because it's more secure. But if I go and break every process in the business and I'm now costing us more money than potentially a ransomware attack that was designed to protect against, did I actually do anything of any value?
So when you look at the learning path here, one of the things we have to give a use case scenarios. So in this one, it says you are a security operation analyst working at a company that is implementing Microsoft Defender for Endpoint. You're responsible for working with the endpoint management team to provide security configuration recommendations for the Windows 10 devices. And that's the situation that they're in. I do want to point out, though, that inside of Defender for Endpoint, if you go over to under TVM, go to security recommendations, they're going to call out those things that you should actually be dealing with on the attack surface reduction rules
Sure.
for working with that. So people should be aware of these.
Definitely be aware of them. Consider, though, that they are called recommendations. And this gets back to where should the control be there? It's a recommendation. It's not a dictation. So in other words, we could say that we would recommend as an analyst that we should definitely do this. But having that, and this even goes back to baseline security practices, having separation of powers, separation of duties, I'm responsible as a security analyst for making a recommendation to implement this, but I can't actually implement it.
Yep.
It is up to my operations team to do the implementation, and then I'm looking over their shoulder from a security standpoint, validating and confirming that what they're saying is true.
And that's not even counting sometimes that this stuff, by virtue that it's Microsoft, sometimes this stuff falls into the hands of the collaboration team.
Oh yeah, of course.
All right, because they are handling the M365 security piece with DLP, phishing, attack simulator, insider risk, and so there's a blurring of it of who owns what.
Mm-hmm.
And when you have that blurring, or you have, what's the old saying? The easiest way to get nothing done is 5 people to do it.
Right? I haven't heard that one. I like that though.
And that's how it works, right? Because they go, well, I thought the collaboration teams were doing it because they got a security guy. Well, I thought the Microsoft security guys were doing it,
mm-hmm.
right? And then you'll have, the SOC. Well, why is not the SOC doing it? So you need focused leadership, and you need RACI.
Yeah.
You need responsibility documents about who owns what. That's the first thing I always say to any customer. Help me understand who owns what. I don't care anything about your technology. Technology is easy. Process responsibility is hard. Who owns what?
Yeah.
Well, we don't know who owns that. I was on a call with a customer, and they could not figure out their support matrix. Well, we don't know who was in charge of renewing the contract for Premier Services. We thought we had it.
I thought Microsoft didn't understand their own support matrix, but that's okay.
That too, but I'm not going to go there. But hey, guys, we're up against it. I know we started.
Yep. We'll just do 2 out of 3, so that would be good.
Yeah, and Matt, thanks so much for coming on. You are always welcome here. If you want to share something with our supporters and listeners, you do not have to wait for an invitation.
Just come busting in.
You can just hit us up and say, hey,
I got something to tell you,
right? Because we have friends of the show, Nathan Swift, Rod Trent. We're about to get Chris Baum on. Andrew Fisher's going to be on. We got a few more lined up. So I think we're going to go to a guest, no guest.
So wait. You have all those excellent people, and then you're like, oh, by the way, here's Matt. It's like,
yeah.
Because basically that is the scenario that you've got there. I mean, you've got excellent. Mm-hmm, definitely. Oh, Andrea, yep, excellent. Oh, there's Matt. So.
Just remember that when people ask you, how was it like being on the show, just say nice things about me so I don't scare people away as I
Yeah, that's right, because Franklin's intimidating. And another thing, same as plug, take this and publish it out to the vast people that are part of your celebrity network and tell them to come to the show.
Celebrity network. Well, I mean, on Twitter, you do have over 2,000 followers. I mean,
and I apologize to them daily.
Let me be my annoying self and correct you. Okay, on your Twitter, by the way, you still have it called Windows Defender.
Mm-hmm. I know. Like I said, I apologize for everything every single day.
So to our listeners, to break it up, pick of the day. I'm a big cartoon guy. If you guys have either Cartoon Network, Adult Swim, or Netflix, go check out Mike Tyson Mysteries.
Oh yeah, definitely. I'm going to say something that I've literally said like 6 times in the last week. Now, kid, which is my favorite phrase with him and the Pigeons.
Now,
kid. So I have to pick something. Is that the concept here?
No, you're fine.
Am I just interrupting Edward as I normally do?
You're just interrupting me. I'm about to get out of here, man. I'm about to go into my hyperbolic chamber and renew myself in my Lazarus pit.
Edward normally goes to bed at 7 p.m. at night. So
Yes, I do.
we're 1 hour past his bedtime already.
He does,
so.
because he gets up at like dark 30 and goes running for 5 million miles before anybody else is up. And I mean, like,
Hey,
I get up, I'm drinking my
slept in
first
today.
cup of coffee. Oh,
I woke up at 4:30 today.
Oh, so you only woke up at, oh my God, it's early. Okay.
Yeah, I got up at 4:30. I meditated, and then I waited till I saw a sliver of sun right around.
Ran 100 miles.
No, I only did about 10 a day.
So normally at about 4 a.m. I get a text from Edward saying, "Good night, Frank," and I send him a text back and say, "Good morning, Edward." All right, Edward, let's get out of here. Great podcast. Until next week.
Till next week. Thank you, guys.
Thanks,
you guys have a good one.
Take it easy.
Bye-bye.